Now, half of you know this map because you've travelled those waters, and half of you haven't. From Albury through to Goolwa is navigable for trailable boats. From Mawala Yarrawonga through to Goolwa is navigable for medium-sized boats, but seasonally only. You've got to have the water and you've got to be able to get clear of snags. Andrew's done most of it. I've done all of it. Right, let's get in. Most of the shots will be the paddle steamers on the Murray. Now I have to, they're in random order now that I've had to recreate it fast. So we're all over the place. This is Adelaide, and the oldest wooden hull paddle steamer in the world. And on this occasion, it's passing through Kundruk Barram because it's making a grand voyage from Echuca to Mildura to celebrate the centenary of the paddle steamer Melbourne. Now, I've tried to pick the oldest versions of each paddle steamer. This is Pevensey when it was still a workboat at Mildura, but no longer working. It's now a tourist boat at Echuca with a few more canopies and passenger conveniences, but not converted to showboat style. This one should have been removed. I have better shots of each. That's Hero. Oh, my mouse points at it. That's Hero on the left under restoration. It was retrieved as a sunken hull, completely refitted, rebuilt. It's now a luxury charter vessel. Alexander Arbuthnot there is a bit meagre because most of its cabin has been removed for overhaul. But it was the last of the conventional paddle steamers built for the Murray, 1923, for the Arbuthnot family running the sawmill at Kundruk, and it was bringing the logs into the sawmill. The sawmill is still there and it's still in the Arbuthnot family. Canberra has had a very varied life. It was at one stage a fishing vessel during the Great Depression, but it was one of the earliest to be turned into modern post-war tourism as a day boat out of Mildura. It then went to Echuca, was running on diesel for a while, is now back to proper steaming, and here it is entering Turrumbary, which is rare for it. The water was up, the water over the sill was available. It ran a 2-week deployment from Echuca, based itself at Turrumbary, so that all the locals could go through the lock. And this is the last day. It's about to go back, and I was on the last trip of the day and then rode it the whole way back to Echuca. Now, which one's next? Sorry, I've got, here we come. This should be scrolling and it isn't. Emilu is a modern construction, 1980s, in traditional style, metal hull, but genuine steam, and they've refitted it since its earliest construction. It now has fewer cabins and all are en suite, and it's now doing 3-night tours, but you don't cruise at night. It's 3 days with 2 nights tied up at a riverbank. The riverbank. Gem was the largest passenger vessel on the river, but not the largest vessel. Kookaburra was longer, and Kookaburra took passengers, but not as many. And because of the enclosed space, this one had the greatest registered tons of any paddle steamer on the Murray. And here it is, only just arrived at Swan Hill for preservation. Then they blocked that canal access in the river and pumped the water up, and it sits at a much higher level now in an artificial lake. Now, this is Rothbury when it was still a workboat, and I think it actually towed that crane barge. It's now been modified completely as a diesel passenger boat for the showboat trade. But that's it's on my caption here, 1966. Melbourne we'll see it further down the screening, was built as a government workboat based at Echuca, And my father photographed it in the 40s, and it was still in original condition in the 60s as it came through Swan Hill. We were there on the day and went to Mildura for conversion to showboat. But it's genuine steam. And like most of the genuine steam in tourist traffic, it uses mill offcuts rather than logged red gum. This is at Psyche Bend on a charter. It doesn't normally come this far up the river, but this was a steam train charter. Mundu was built as a steamer, metal, bit cumbersome, but gutless. And it's been sold from Goolwa, where it's photographed here. It's now gone to Mildura and it's been converted to diesel. And it's used for big wedding charters, party, social group charters, but it's not rostered daily at all. Ruby is one of my favourites because of this early experience, seeing Ruby in 1966. The steam propulsion has been removed. It's there as a houseboat. From there, it was placed in Fotherby Park in Wentworth as a static exhibit. Then an active group got together, organised by Captain Leon Wagner, and it was restored, and I watched the stages of the restoration and was there for each landmark and was there when it first steamed, and I've now voyaged in it under steam from Wentworth to Renmark. Canally is one of the last of the hulls to be removed from the river for restoration. Any of the wrecks now are under the same Shipwreck Act as applies internationally, cannot be raised. Took years of effort here at Euston to get this far. It sank, and in the end, the men who were doing it up ran out of money and ran out of energy, and it's now been relocated to a new group all doing it up at Morgan, South Australia. Oscar W was built in Echuca, named after Captain somebody Wallen's son, Oscar, who was killed in World War I think. And it's based now in Goolwa, but it loves to voyage and it loves to get home to Echuca when it can, which isn't very often, but it's doing so on this occasion. This is the 150th anniversary of the Randall Cadle, initial steam navigation of the Murray, the famous race. Behind, you'll see again later, is a replica of Lady Augusta, one of the two original boats. So this was a very major rally. This was the Riverboater Zone. Enterprise was quite small. I don't know what it did in its Murray life, but here it is in Canberra. It is now owned by the National Museum, and it steams on Lake Burley Griffin, but the only people who can ride it are members of Friends of the Museum. It does not do public cruises. Decoy is a replica, or the hull is a replica. The superstructure is quite much more, based on Swan River in Perth for jazz cruises, dinners, afternoon teas, charter, the lot. But it's a little bit gutless and the river's shallow. It has been blown out of course at times, which could lead it to being grounded or hitting one of the road bridges. This isn't Australia, but it's New Zealand's preserved paddle steamer Waimarie, which means good fortune on Wanganui at Wanganui. I had the opportunity to steer it for half an hour once, but that's a friend's photo. Right, back to the 1940s, Echuca. My father had a holiday there. He'd been a Murray River boy in his teenage years. And there is Melbourne in its original workboat guise. And in front of it is Murrumbidgee, which was about to be converted to the first of the post-war tourist boats for cruising the Murray as a cruise. And it lasted for just under its first season and burnt to the waterline. The hull is still there if you know where to look. Right, this is the replica Lady Augusta for the 150th anniversary. The original was twice as long. The plan for this replica is that two people will build half a hull each, spliced together for this event, and then they'd separate them and complete them, but only one person put up the money. So the original Lady Augusta had a cabin at the front and a cabin at the rear, but much longer. So this is a scale replica. Those who don't know the Murray, the big frame there is a tow frame. You cannot tow with a tow rope at the back. You lose steerage. All towing is done with the rope attached to that frame. How far advanced? Sorry, that was that one. And this is the other replica, the original Mary Ann. Considerable research was needed to decide that the hull looked like this. The wine glass stern was not typical of Murray boats. But Dick Bromhead, who did the research, decided that that's how the original was built. The son of a flour miller in South Australia, and it was designed to take the family flour to the Bendigo goldfields, the site of the future at Chukamoama, and then bullocks across the Campaspe Plains. And the same rally, William Randall, was built as a retirement hobby by a woodwork teacher in Goolwa, Rawley Bartlett, and this was its one and only voyage to Echuca, and that's passing under the Kundruk Barham Bridge. I think it's not on the caption. Yeah, because the sign at the top reads New South Wales and the other side reads Victoria, or vice versa. And the whole of the high school, local high school, had shut down for the morning. All the teenagers walked down to the bridge and watched the fleet come through. And when the last one went through, they all applauded. This is the local boat, PS Barham, to greet the fleet. The owner was an engineer who built a vertical steam engine. So then he said, I'll need a boat to use this in. So he built the boat, and it's dual, it's steam and diesel. Now, this is a privately owned steamer moored near Echuca. I've never seen it move. The reputation is that it's grossly underpowered. It's immensely slow. It takes all day to do even a local rally. It could never voyage the Murray. It might not fight the current upstream either. This one is known to many of you. That's Billy T within weeks of its completion and launching, or near completion. It wasn't complete, but it was launched by built in Canberra, launched by crane at Yarrawonga, steamed from Yarrawonga to Swan Hill to join the fleet coming upstream. It's now with a new owner. The steam equipment is removed and there's extra cabin work. Steam there. I think that's Mosquito. And Culkine is a modern diesel houseboat built to traditional styles, based at Mildura, and this was its first and only ever voyage to Echuca. Where are we at? One of my favourites, and with a very distinguished history. Etona was built with money supplied by the old boys of Eton College in a project sponsored by the Bishop of Adelaide to be a mission boat in South Australia. It has when its job was done, the towns had grown. The communities were no longer wild frontier. The towns had their own churches. It went into the fishing trade and was butchered a fair bit. Here it is restored to original condition, and you may well have seen it reprising its original role as a mission boat in all the rivers run. I didn't check our starting time. How are we going for 20 to 30 minutes? It's 8:22. Right, that's Perikuta, which is steam, although it doesn't look it. I'm not sure what fuel it uses. One of a family of boats built by Peter McLeod, but he sold them on. It's still based at Echuca. adventurous. I was going to buy this in conjunction with a friend. I think it's still steam, may not be, but it's been lengthened and improved and still based at Echuca. Stern wheels weren't common on the Murray. Curlip was built as a tourist gimmick for the Snowy, based at Marlow, because you can't get as far up as August. It's too silted. And this was on its commissioning day, with all of the wigs and the invited guests. But the tourists never did front to Marlow. The whole project languished, and then the boat was attacked by teredo worms. It's now sitting at Painesville on the Hard, being done up by a men's shed, and should be trading out of Bairnsdale if the project comes to completion. But the early optimism has evaporated. Cato is a modern build, metal hull, one of the 2 oil burners on the Murray. The other we haven't seen yet. It's been up as far as Renmark for the Chowler Homestead 150th anniversary. It's crossed Lake Alexandrina and gone into Lake Albert. It was one of 2 boats attending the 150th anniversary of the town Meningie. Industry was built as a government workboat, which is why it had the boom and why it has extra cabins. So it was used for snag clearing, maintenance of locks, maintenance of the one bridge. There weren't very many in that era. It then was retired, went to static preservation at Renmark, stayed there for several years, and an active group got together, restored it to working order. And so it runs regular cruises, quite a variety. Here, it has come downstream to Berry because it's about to go up for its survey slipping on the government slip at Berry. Alexander Arbuthnot, which we saw before with its superstructure off, and this still doesn't give you a really good view, but it does show you the Echuca slipway. Hero, which we saw before when it was under restoration, here it is working, and in fact is running a public cruise. The port of Echuca had its key boats out of use for a school holiday. One was on the slip and one was giving trouble, so they chartered Hero to maintain their school holiday program. Marion, I'm a friend of Marion. I was going to wear that hat, but it turns out that the camera on the laptop was giving a mirror reversed image. So here it is voyaging downstream to meet paddle steamer Ruby coming upstream and travel in tandem for the first time in 60 years. And Jessie too was there following on the water to get the photos. So this photo was taken by a friend who was aboard Ruby. Not mine at all, it's State Library, I think. That's Yolonga, one of 3 that were almost identical. Another was Pevensey, Yolonga, and one more, which became Wanera, a passenger boat based at Mildura. That's Banyala, a wreck that was retrieved. But why? What on earth could the owner do with it? This is a modern diesel built at Cobram. It's called Cobber, runs party charters and morning tea and afternoon cruises, aluminium hull. And interestingly, when he's docking, all of the controls are run by umbilical cord. He uses differential paddling for control because the current there is ferocious. Right, that one shouldn't be in this screening. That's Canberra when it was steam and based at Mildura. And way across is Rothbury. This was purpose-built in the 1970s from the hull of a barge. It's a diesel paddle boat. It belongs to the same fleet as Canberra and Emmylou, private fleet, not the port's fleet, and it's their quickie, cheapy party vessel for 21sts who can't afford a steam charter. We should have seen Piap earlier at Mildura, but I think that's one that missed my duplicate screening. It's now diesel, and it does the passenger cruises out of Swan Hill. And here it is at home base with the Randall Cato fleet mooring at Swan Hill for the night. Now that's Wanera, which was cargo boat Ulonga. Or it may have been the third, running as a passenger boat, and behind it is Kunawara, which was built from a barge. The Murray Valley coach line, which ran the Murrumbidgee, which I mentioned earlier, built this one out of a barge to replace Murrumbidgee, and were trying to voyage from Echuca to Swan Hill, but discovered that the water was too unreliable for a boat of that size. Spent years at Murray Bridge, got bumped by more modern boats. I think Kunawara is the one that featured on the first Australian overseas stamp. So they're cruising in tandem. Wanera burnt to the waterline. The hull is in private ownership and on a private slipway. Eventually it'll be restored to some form of operation, but that's a long-term project. Murray River Queen is, I think, 1970s, built to traditional style for voyaging. The Murray hasn't voyaged for ages. It's been a static bed and breakfast at Berry and now at Renmark. And I believe most of its patrons are backpackers in the fruit picking trade, and they stay aboard and go out each day to the vines and the orchards. Mayflower's had a very long history. It was here it is as a diesel tourist boat at Mildura. It then became a private houseboat. It was donated to the Mannum Museum and has been restored as a passenger working boat in its 1940s condition. And because it's diesel, they can run quickie or small scale charters with it. But in its restoration era, it's come from Mannum the whole way to Renmark for one of the Wentworth Junction rallies, and David was there with his boat at the same time as this boat was there. Paddle steamer stern wheeler Goolwa diesel, now running as a B&B only. Thompson Bell had been built as Ginger Bell for the Marucci with steam propulsion. It's now on the Thompson at Longreach. The steam equipment is still in position, but it's run with a diesel. Julie Fay was built for afternoon tea cruising, 45 centimetre draft, built in Port Adelaide, and it came around the coast under its own power, through the Murray mouth and up the Murray. It's been in private ownership for some time, and it's now trading as a B&B somewhere above Echuca. And what looks to be the last for tonight, Avoca, built in 1877. There's a steamer, converted as a showboat and diesel. When it came to Mildura, it was diesel electric, and the electrics had come out of Adelaide trams. It's now running as diesel hydraulic. And I have no fancy slide to bring us to the end. That is the end, and I shall switch